Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 9:27 p.m., and I believe it's the 16th of October, 2025. And we're still here. Isn't that interesting? I received some news from a friend, sometime at the beginning of September. And he said that things were going to get unloaded on October 1st. And by unloaded, he meant war, economic collapse, and I believe that is unbelievable. An insect just landed on my camera. That's its tail hanging down there. Unbelievable. Right on the iPhone camera, which is on a stand in the windowsill. That is kind of amazing. And the third thing being some kind of extraterrestrial panic. And none of these things have really happened. I don't think anything is going to happen in a dramatic way. And the reason that I believe that is a dramatic happening would force action by the people. And the people still have the ability to change anything because we're the majority. And most of what they're doing with our energy, our consent, which is the height of stupidity. I don't think the human race has ever been stupider, but who knows? I can't remember living millions of years. But as we go on these little roller coaster rides, what I do notice is how susceptible we are to this doom narrative. I'm not immune. I mean, I guess the only difference with me is I can pull out of things a lot quicker than most people. You know, most people, they get sucked into something, it's hard to get out. Whereas I can go fully into something and find my way out fairly easily, compared to most people. And this has given me throughout my life the ability to explore and to go into things. You see, I believe one of the ways that we understand things, in fact, the principal way we understand things is by becoming them. Okay? There's an old maxim, an old adage in contemplative circles that states that when you can no longer tell the difference between yourself and the object contemplated upon, it's a perfect meditation. So dissolution of self or personality is a big part of meditation. And so once you learn this experientially, you sort of retain this ability to go into things and come out of them fairly easily. I wouldn't try my theory. Hang on a sec, this insect is just driving me crazy here. Come on, buddy. You gotta get off of there. There you go. I wouldn't test my theory by experimenting with heroin or anything like that. I'm, not not talking about anything like that, but I guess the books are an example. going into this darkness for the light of darkness, going into this UFO world and experiencing a lot of it right up here on the mountain. And then the devil and us going into my childhood mythos of the devil and exploring that and completely immersing myself in it. It's like method acting when you hear those outrageous stories from Hollywood, I think the first really outrageous one I heard, the one that set the standard for all outrageous pretense related to pretending, which is what acting is. You're pretending. And sometimes if there's not a full immersion in the character, then it's actually better, because it just allows the story to unfold better. But somehow American actors got it into their head sometime around 1980 that you had to completely commit to a role. And the first was Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, which is like 45 years ago now. But that film was really quite something, the way he fine-tuned his body to look like a boxer and trained every day for months, I think a full year before filming. And then to play Jake LaMotta in his later years, he put on like 40 or 60 pounds. Just binge ate, for 3 or 4 months and just stacked on the weight. It was really quite something. And everybody who saw it went, wow, that's really quite something. And sometime around this time, actors became kind of synonymous with artists, which they're not. An actor is a strange creature. Now, sometimes the method, I got to admit, it really works. And then sometimes it's just outrageous. Does anybody remember Jim Carrey talking about, playing Andy Kaufman and all that stuff? Allow me to refresh your memory.
Yes.
How would you start this movie?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Carrey, and how are you this evening? Alrighty then.
Finding out you have something special and it gets a reaction. That's how I got attention and love.
I've watched the stars fall silent from
Andy Kaufman came in to turn reality on its head and not stop when the camera stopped.
Andy Kaufman cared less about making his audience laugh than keeping them confused.
He blew my mind. When I heard I had the part, I was looking at the ocean, and that's the moment when Andy came back to make his movie.
Hello.
What happened after was out of my control.
Andy, that's enough. Perfect.
I don't like it. I want to do one more.
Andy felt it was necessary to stay in the character.
He's exactly the way Andy was.
It's totally surreal.
And this crazy melodrama started happening all over the place. Jimmy said they came down hard.
Who's they?
Universal didn't want the footage we took behind the scenes to surface so that people wouldn't think I was an asshole.
Andy, you have to give me a chance to make a movie.
I don't need to make a movie.
I was thinking, how far should I take this?
I see. Sound check.
Sound check. It's working.
How far would Andy take it?
You're going to have people that are going to sue this production for mental stress.
When the movie was over, I couldn't remember who I was anymore. So you step through the door not knowing what's on the other side. And what's on the other side is everything.
If you believe they put a man on the moon, man on the moon.
I know him as well as I can know him. But who do you know, even when they're right in front of you?
So there you go. A classic story of method acting. In fact, if we're to take Jim Carrey at his face value oh, I just learned something. When I play videos, my sound gets recalibrated. Okay. I mean, Jim Carrey took it to absurd levels, and I don't know what he was trying to prove or what he was trying to do. I didn't think Man on the Moon was that great a movie. But that line he says about, when the role came in, he was on the beach, one would assume in California, Malibu probably. That's where all the rich types live. And he said that Andy decided to, make another appearance, another performance. He's literally saying that the spirit of Andy Kaufman entered his body and expressed itself through Jim Carrey's body. And so that, in a sense, was an example of mediumship. Now, to be honest with you, as I've tracked Jim Carrey's career, and it is of some interest to me, he's Canadian. He's basically my generation, a few years older. Started out in the comedy scene in Canada at a chain of comedy clubs called Yuck Yucks. Comes from that same little patch of ground in the east end of Toronto, Scarborough. Used to be a suburb, now it's a city and part of the greater Toronto area. But all, born, I think, within a year of Mike Myers, and they're within 3 to 10 blocks of each other where they grew up. Now, I mean, try to get your head around that. And the only reason I ever thought about this is because I met the third. And the third was Alan Park, who never went to the United States, but stayed in Canada and went as far as you could go in that system, which is being a part of a sketch comedy troupe, right? And being on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. You Americans, you don't understand national broadcasters, right? They're huge in the Commonwealth. There's a British Broadcasting Company, Canadian Broadcasting Company, Australian Broadcasting Company. I think Mother England mandates all this stuff, and the colonies kind of have to do it. I don't know how it works, but it seems to be British-led to me. But that's as far as you could go in the Canadian system. And then he had a lot of voice work. He made a lot of money, man. I mean, for a Canadian guy who, if you added up all the hours he worked in a year, he maybe worked 3 months a year and made $500,000 a year. And like Mike Myers and Jim Carrey, born in this little patch of ground in the East End. And I point that out because it's worth thinking about. Because any event that defies, on its face, defies statistical probability is a natural magnet for people of a contemplative disposition. People who are studying reality, inner and outer. You see something like that and you go, how could that happen? How could these three comedic geniuses be born all around the same time between 1960 and 1963 in the same place and all grow up to be world-class comedians? Like, it's strange. It's not as strange. Okay, let me put this into perspective for you. Whatever your national sport is, like, let's say, I think it's rugby in Australia. They like rugby, and it's hockey in Canada, and it's, let's say, you could go football, basketball, or baseball in the United States. Now imagine 3 baseball players, all born within a year of each other, all growing up 10 blocks from each other, or within a 10 block circumference, not really knowing each other until they get to be in their early 20s, and then just maybe kind of crossing paths in a green room at a stand-up comedy club. Okay, now imagine 3 people, as I described it, growing up to be the best footballers in Australia, or the best basketball players in the United States. If like Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Larry Bird were all the same age, like close enough in age that at a certain part in any given year, they would all be the same age, like 35. Okay? And the total distance between them could be like a year and a half. And they grew up to dominate basketball. Now, if they grew up playing together, that would be even stranger. Because why would creation put 3 top-tier athletes in the same place in the same generation? It's just like stuff like this never happens. You know, when you study backstories, you know, it's very strange. Anyways, as a bit of a tangent, but Jim Carrey, he went on to do Man on the Moon, and he followed the method. He took it probably further than anybody's ever taken it. Physically, and in a dramatic role, it might be, well, as of 1980, it was Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. Okay? What he did to, you know, get prepared for that role, and what he did, how he built the body and then destroyed the body, gained 40, 50 pounds. It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. And it's just another reminder of how serious we take pretending. Pretending is one of the most serious things in the world now. You ever stop and think about that? Used to be pretending is what children did. And again, it goes back to this idea of we pretend because we understand things by becoming them. Okay? We understand things by becoming them. And that's what pretending is. You pretend to be something. You're trying to become something by pretending. Now, you could say that these actors are fulfilling the biblical ethic that except ye be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. But that they're not pretending in that way. They're not pretending like children playing at all. What they're doing is something completely different. It's more akin to some form of self-torture. Okay? And for the most part, the results aren't that interesting. You know, especially when lesser actors try it. You know? Acting is just acting. You just pretend to be somebody else. But we live in a world now where actors are taken deadly serious. It's like the height of ludicrousness, right? But the principle persists. If you want to understand something, become it. And what this suggests is that everything about us is impermanent. How could we be anything but an impermanence if we could become something else? Con men understand this very well. You know, real professional con men, fraudsters. Those are some of the most respected people in jail, by the way. because they make the most money and it's non-violent. They don't have to risk interacting with civilians and hurting people or scaring people or traumatizing people. Fraud guys are kind of legendary figures in jail. I don't know about prison, but in jail. You know, when they're awaiting trial and stuff, everybody is, oh, hey, he's in for fraud. He got away with like $3 million. And those guys, you just, I was in jail for about 40 days, somewhere around 2012. It's a long story. I'll tell it another time. But the fraud guys, they do easy time. It's because everybody respects them. And when they're done their sentence, you don't get heavy sentences for fraud. In Canada, you might get a 6 or 7 year sentence and do 2 or 3 of it. And you would do it because it's a non-violent crime. You would do it at a medium or minimum security prison. And then when you get out, you got all your cheddar. You got all the money you stole. They never give it all back. Right? So fraud guys, big in prison. But in a way, Jim Carrey sort of broke the mold. And Man on the Moon broke Jim Carrey. It broke him in terms of his desire and his ambition. You could say it exorcised him. That Andy Kaufman exorcised Jim Carrey of his own demons. Because after Man on the Moon, there was nothing more for Jim to do. There were no more challenges. There were no more experiences in acting. How could you experience anything more than allowing someone into your body to act through your body after they've died? And I don't think Jim's exaggerating about that. I think he's telling the truth. And the reason I think he's telling the truth is the way the movie kind of broke him. And then he went through this phase where people kind of thought he was crazy. Right? He'd show up at Fashion Week and, oh, hey, Jim Carrey, how are you? And he'd say to the interviewer, who's Jim Carrey? Well, you are. You're Jim Carrey, Jim. Oh, that's just a role I played. I'm not playing that role anymore. And you could see all these little clips of Jim Carrey kind of appearing to be insane, because Hollywood doesn't like that kind of behavior unless they can sell it. If you can channel that into a vehicle they sell, you can be as outrageous as you want. But when you're just doing that, the paparazzi kind of think you're crazy. Now, in a way, Jim Carrey is kind of an example of what everybody has to go through now, which is being released from yourself, being released from your personality, being released from your ambition, and being released from your desire. Now, don't confuse what I'm saying. If you're halfway through med school, don't drop out. That's not really an ambition or a desire. It's a discipline, and it's rooted in service. That's not really what I'm talking about. But in a certain sense, a very specific sense, what Jim Carrey did was the template for what everybody has to do now. You have to stop playing your role. And what this extreme acting teaches you, especially like when you watch these people interviewed, and I enjoy that sort of thing. De Niro's horrible at interviews. He can't really play himself that well. He just sort of mumbles. Really didn't start doing interviews till his mid-60s, and he's in his early, 20 years ago. But before that, he was like J.D. Salinger. He was a total recluse, didn't want to do interviews. It's more common with writers. Another really interesting one is Daniel Day-Lewis. The stories you hear about him preparing for a role, and then what he does in between movies. You know, he's retired a couple. He's retired a couple of times. You know, so he did some really huge movies. Did some good work with Paul Thomas Anderson, the guy who just came out with One Battle After Another. And that was There Will Be Blood, about the oil man in the late 1800s. And Daniel Day-Lewis was brilliant in that. And my God, man, if you happen to see Steven Spielberg's Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Abraham Lincoln, you would swear it was Abraham Lincoln. From everything you've read about Lincoln, every picture you've seen, everything was really amazing. And then he retires is what he does. And so when they wanted him to play Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, when Martin Scorsese wanted him for that film, they didn't know if they could get him because Daniel had retired. And you know what he was doing in his retirement? He was a shoe cobbler in Italy. He literally opened up a little shop, one of the most famous actors in the world, and he fixed shoes. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I find that really strange. You know? And then now he hasn't done a movie in about 8 years, and he's got a movie coming out now that was written and directed by his son. So once again, he came out of retirement. Now I will tell you this. The value of this process of acting, and acting intensely, like these method actors, is that somewhere in the process, you end up breaking from yourself or your concept of yourself. And that's an extraordinary thing to do. That's a spiritual achievement. And by talking about it tonight in the context of acting and the arts, we get another example of doing it, not rooted in contemplative practice or asceticism or monastic living, but you can do it. There are various ways you can do it in life, where you can just escape yourself. You can just crawl out of it like a cocoon, or shed it like a snake shedding a skin. Any yogi will tell you you can do it through breathing and meditation after a few years. And then after a little bit longer than that, it'll kind of take root. And then whoever you were before is kind of gone. Doesn't exist anymore. You know? I find that very, very interesting. A very, very interesting thing to think about now. You know? People get attached to what they think they are. And what these actors show us is that it's all kind of meaningless. You know? Jim Carrey being the most extreme example of it. And it's a little bit weird because, you know, Jim is a comedic actor. And you would expect this to be something that comes from a dramatic actor. You know? Well, this is something that everybody does up until a certain point. You know, everybody does this to a certain point. Every accoutrement upon us is a falsity. If we're a falsity, then every accoutrement to us is a falsity. And yet attachment to these things can create tremendous, explosive violence and reactions. Family is an accoutrement to yourself. Culture is an accoutrement to yourself. It's an accessory to yourself. I'm Bruce McDonald. I was born in Ottawa in 1966. My mother and father were so-and-so. My brother is so-and-so. My sister is so-and-so. My nieces and nephews are so-and-so. My son is so-and-so. But if we don't really exist, what are these things for? You know, this is a little practical contemplation. And there's really only one answer. That every accoutrement to yourself placed into your life is a karmic bond. It's a debt you either owe or a debt that is owed to you. That's it. And it's a fascinating thing to contemplate as you look at the world and you look at debt as a cultural accoutrement. Well, Canada's, $5 trillion in debt. The United States is $37 trillion in debt. Australia's in $4 or $5 trillion of debt. Is it real? Right? And debt is something that you borrowed and you have to return. Right? So if somebody up here borrows my wheelbarrows or my shovels or my drill, they have to return them. There's no interest. They just have to return them. You can't escape these debts. You can't escape them. You can run and you can hide, but you can't escape your debts. Because they're woven into your life. They're just sitting there as unmanifested events, sitting on the astral, waiting to be discharged, and discharging is manifesting them in reality. But this debt we have now, you've heard me talk this way before. It's no coincidence that they set the debt system up at like your monthly bills. There's no coincidence that they set that at a monthly cycle. Because the lunar cycle is the month, it's 28 days. Solar calendar is an approximation of that, but the astrological calendar, which follows the celestial bodies, is much more accurate. And our principal clock is the moon. we should be on a lunar calendar because that would more closely align us with our astral bodies. I don't know why we went to a solar calendar, but the Jews are right about that. They still follow a lunar calendar within their own culture. Right? And they did that. They set it up with the moon so it would feel natural to us, because the moon is one of the principal cycles. The sun is a 24-hour cycle, rising and falling. And then the moon it's really best captured. It's also a 24-hour cycle, but you don't see the moon every night, right? And its real cycle is the month. It's 28 days. And the world now is at this point where this artificial system is like a straitjacket. You can't move. You can't get out of it. You're sitting in a padded room. You can bang your head against the wall all you want. You can get out of it if you leave. But I have a feeling that in most of the first world countries, they're going to make that very difficult to do unless you leave the country completely. And now there's other ways of leaving. Leaving just means leaving the system or the culture you exist within. It could mean in a certain limited way just the 9 to 5. The hassle of all that. Now, if you wanted to leave that, where would you go? Everywhere you went, you would not be allowed to live peacefully within nature. Right? So get yourself a little bit of land. Keep some livestock for dairy and meat and chickens. And then just do whatever you have to do for the rest of your needs. Sell, trade, barter. Find some way to make a little bit of money, but not really the 9 to 5 thing. And voila, you're out. And then once you're out, it takes a while to realize you're out, because the habits you've been entrained with are structured discipline. Showing up at school Monday to Friday at 9 a.m. for the first bell in your homeroom is a structured discipline. Now, I'm not saying that this is all bad. That's not what I'm saying. We can achieve a lot more working together than we can alone. An economy of scale is a very powerful thing. I once saw Milt Friedman talk for a couple minutes on the economic miracle of a pencil. And it's just this video, I think he did it in the 80s. It was in an interview, and he holds up the pencil and he goes, "The graphite for this pencil was mined. The wood was cut down and processed. The rubber came from a rubber tree. The metal band joining the wood and the rubber together were made somewhere else. So you've got a rubber tree plantation somewhere, I don't know, South America, let's say. You've got the metal forge making the clasps for the pencil. You've got the lumberjacks beginning the process of the wood refining, and then it would go through various stages of refining. And then you've got the graphite, the lead. They're all graphite now, but you've got the graphite in the center of the pencil. And basically, Friedman's point was the whole world came together to produce this pencil. And it's a really compelling argument. Okay? You know, and it's also a reminder of how good this collective organization could be if we were really allowed to do it and we were run by honorable people, our leaders, and that our institutions were honorable, and that everything was for the human benefit and the human growth within a spiritual context. So living, growing, sharing the fruits of a society. It's kind of beautiful when you think about it. And I don't want you to think that because I moved to an earthbag house in the rainforest, I have any contempt for that kind of mass population organization. I don't. I actually think it's kind of brilliant. And in many ways, it defines the entire 20th century. The 20th century was really about how do you govern large modern populations. We tried monarchy. We've tried dictatorship. We've tried communism, socialism, democratic socialism, capitalism, social capitalism. And then you get extremists on every end of the argument. This idea of how we govern ourselves produces extremism. It's very interesting when you think about it. And, you know, take the whole podcast in its context, because it's all connected. Because at the end of the day, we're just playing roles. Okay? These young people who join Antifa, they're playing a role. They're given the script. It connects with them emotionally. They commit to the part. They go method. And then you put a microphone and a camera in front of them 2 years after they've been in a prison and ask them what they were doing. And they'll say, I don't know. They don't retain the role when it becomes hard to maintain the role because it's not who they truly are. Why would you hold on to something that's causing you pain? If I put a stone the size of a baseball in a fire, and it was, let's say, a sauna stone, and I let it heat up until the point it was red hot, I took it out with some tongs and I put it in your hand, how long would you hold it? Well, you'd let go of it immediately in the first millisecond it touched your skin. The pain would tell you to let it go. But who we really are, we can't let go of. Because it's not a role. But everything else is really just a role. I don't mean to pick on Antifa. On the far right, you've got anarcho-capitalism. You know, anarchistic capitalism. The market will correct every problem. These people are loath to admit that legislation had to be put into place to prevent slavery. So like right out of the gate, you know that pure anarcho-capitalism can't work. And yet there's still people who buy into this. Most right-wing Jews do. Ben Shapiro does. There's a BitChute guy that a lot of you listen to. I get sent his videos every once in a while. He lives in Mexico now. I forget his name. He took care of Max Egan for a while. He's an anarcho-capitalist. Doug Casey, a semi-famous guy in financial circles. All of these billionaires they're either communists or anarchistic capitalists. And it's just kind of amazing to sit back and watch it all go down. Okay? Really incredible. And so what's the point of tonight's podcast? Because the Talamanca Review is really sort of talking about the same thing all the time, in different ways. Fireside chat. You either listen to me in the evening or you listen to me in the morning, depending on where you live. But I always do my work generally in the evening. I generally don't like daytime podcasting. I need to let the whole day percolate inside me. And then I like to sit down in front of the mic sometime around 9 p.m. And then my wife Rosemary goes to bed anywhere between 8 and 8:30, maybe 9. And she gets up at like 4:35. Not me. I get up at like 8:30. I go to bed at 1:30, 2 o'clock. I get up at 8:30. I might have a little nap in the afternoon. You can do whatever you want when you live the way I do. But my point is, we're all playing a role. You know, everybody's playing a role. It's just a role. And that's why you see so many templates out there. You know, the gold and silver people. Have you seen that template? You know, they've screwed us. They're trying to destroy Western civilization. But you can still get rich on gold and silver. They're holding on to a role. Great white capital hunter. Let's hold on to what's ours. We're not going to give it to the second and the third world. Whatever is really yours, nobody can take away. Everything else, if it can be taken away, it was never really yours, spiritually. The Bitcoin people. We're going to make it. We're all going to make it. You know, Bitcoin is the future. Yeah, get all your money into Bitcoin just dropped 20 billion in a day. Largest single 24-hour, I can't remember if it was 24 hours or 1 week, but I think it was 24 hours. By far, by a factor of 10, 15, 20 times, the largest single day loss in Bitcoin ever. Loss of $20 billion of market valuation. What happened? People don't want to let go of their roles. You know? But your role doesn't really serve you. You can be all of those things that you need to be in a life, a husband, a wife, a father, a son. You can be all of those things and be your authentic self. Things change. There was a group of poets called the Black Mountain Poets in the 60s and 70s. It was a school of poetry in the United States. When people took this kind of thing seriously, there's no more poetry. TikTok killed poetry. But you know how I feel about literature, right? But there was this Black Mountain poet named Charles Olson. Definitely worth reading if you can. All of this stuff you can get for free now. Most of the publishing houses have made all the manuscripts open source. You can download EPUBs and read them on your tablet and Apple Books or whatever the Android version is. And the Black Mountain poets weren't connected to the beat poets, those degenerate pedophile drug addicts. But Charles Olson said the only constant is change. What a beautiful way to synthesize the ironic mirror when you think about it. And that's the power of poetry, to encapsulate an unbelievably large concept or principle into one perfect line that doesn't miss it at all. The only constant is change. Now, the people who habitually are most against change are the management class. It's all fine and dandy to chop off a few heads down on the factory floor. Scares the rest of the other 300 employees. And yes, sir, I get that work done right away, sir. I'll start coming in 15 minutes before my shift, and I'll have an extra cup of coffee so I'm super awake to do my job on that factory line. Right? Because they're scared. They don't want to lose their role. Job is another form of role. Management class is completely comfortable with the decimation of consistency in the underclass's lives. And this is what's been going on since we won the Cold War. I mean, I knew by the late 90s that there was nothing benign in our governance. They fooled me all the way through the Cold War. I'll give them that, but I was very young. Right? The Cold War ended in somewhere between 88 and 91. You kind of knew it was over around 88. That was, I think, the year I met Gorbachev in Ottawa. And then by 91 or 92, it was all formalized. The Berlin Wall, everything. And the moment that happened, our managerial class suddenly regarded us as disposable. But before that, they entertained all kinds of equitable institutionalization, equitable because it redistributed wealth. Labor movement, okay? The American auto workers, the Canadian auto workers. Two of the most powerful unions, one union in two different countries, but two of the most powerful unions in North America. You know, at the height of the union movement, for those of you who've seen The Irishman with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci and a bunch of other great actors, it's the story of Jimmy Hoffa. And there was a time when Jimmy Hoffa had almost as much power as the President of the United States. He was a labor leader. He led the Teamsters, the truck guys. Where did all that go? And if you remember, that was when we had a middle class. Okay? And we're so used to thinking about numbers now, we don't think about quality of life in basic terms. Shelter, good, comfortable, aesthetically pleasing shelter. Doesn't have to be huge. You could find a great place in anywhere in China, really. A farmhouse, whatever. A condo in Shanghai. You can do it in any city. You need shelter, you need nutrition, and then you need companionship in the human experience. Now, in terms of numbers, the North American economies have never produced higher numbers than they have beginning with the end of the Cold War. They're astronomical now. The U.S. economy is, somewhere around $15 trillion a year now, 12 to 15 trillion a year. And yet people can't even afford the most basic necessities of a human life. You can more easily find permanent shelter in Thailand, Malaysia, Nicaragua, than you can. There's no homeless people down here. Well, I mean, when you go to San Jose, there's some druggies, but that's lifestyle, right? But there's no epidemic of homelessness. There's no tent cities or anything like that. The food is good. By the way, I'm giving up the carnivore diet. I feel okay, but I don't know. I mean, it hasn't transformed me completely. I've experienced some benefits from it, but I feel compelled to go back to the vegetarian life. So, don't let anybody ever say Bruce McDonald is closed-minded. I became a carnivore. But I don't like it. I don't like eating meat every day. Okay? Don't like it at all. I'll probably eat meat in small amounts intermittently, but in a largely vegetarian diet. Anyways, a little bit of a sidebar there. But what's going on now is the end of all roles. There are no more roles to play. This is why you see everybody getting scared. Because when there's no role to play, you go through that psychotic transition Jim Carrey went through, coming out of Man on the Moon and trying to become a normal human being again. And figure out who he is. Right? But really, there are no roles. We are creator beings of the highest spiritual origins, cast into matter, to remember in matter that we are spirit beings. It's like a test, All the world's a stage, and we are merely actors upon it. William Shakespeare. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.